The woman adjusted her coat as she stepped into the grand bank she had built from the ground up. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floors gleamed, but something felt off. She approached the counter, only to be met with a cold glare from the manager. "We do not serve people like you," he sneered, eyeing her modest attire. A hush fell over the room. No one knew she was the CEO. Seconds later, an unimaginable moment unfolded, one that would change everything. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The woman took a deep breath as she stepped into the bank's grand lobby, the same one she had envisioned years ago when she first started building her empire. The high ceilings, the elegant chandeliers, the pristine marble floors, everything reflected success. Yet as she stood there, unnoticed, dressed in a simple coat and scarf, she realized how different things looked from the outside. She walked toward the counter, expecting the usual warm welcome she had received in corporate meetings, but instead, she was met with an icy stare from the branch manager. He barely glanced at her before speaking, his voice dripping with irritation. "You cannot just walk in here and expect service? Do you even have an account?" A few people in the lobby turned to look. She could feel their judgmental eyes scanning her, assuming she did not belong. She remained composed, pulling out her bank card and sliding it toward him. "I do," she replied, keeping her voice calm. The manager scoffed, barely glancing at the card. "Minimum balance requirements exist for a reason. People like you should go to smaller banks, not here." She felt a surge of disbelief. Was this really happening? She had spent years ensuring that this bank provided excellent customer service, that no one was treated differently based on appearance. And yet here she was, being dismissed like an unimportant stranger. She straightened her posture, deciding to test him further. "I need to make a withdrawal," she said, her voice unwavering. The manager let out an exasperated sigh, shaking his head. "Look, I do not have time for this. We have real clients to attend to. If you cannot meet the standards of this institution, I suggest you leave." A hushed silence spread through the lobby. The other employees at nearby desks glanced at each other, but said nothing. Customers watched, intrigued yet unwilling to interfere. She studied the manager, noting the arrogance in his posture. He had no idea who she was. He did not recognize the woman whose vision had turned this bank into one of the most successful financial institutions in the country. She had spent years building a reputation of integrity, yet here was a man, one of her own employees, shattering that vision in seconds. She glanced at his name tag. "Mr. Calloway, is it?" she asked. His expression barely changed. "I do not see how that is relevant," he muttered. She exhaled slowly, then reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. With a few taps, she accessed a secure app that only high-level executives had permission to use. A few swipes later, she had the employee records in front of her. Mr. Calloway's name was there, along with his performance reviews. There were complaints, multiple ones, customer service concerns, instances where he had made clients uncomfortable, but nothing had been done, until now. She met his eyes, watching the impatience growing in them. He still had no idea, but he was about to find out in the most unforgettable way possible. Mr. Calloway let out an impatient sigh, tapping his fingers against the counter as if she were wasting his time. He had already dismissed her in his mind, assuming she was just another insignificant customer who would eventually leave. He did not know that every second of his arrogance was sealing his fate. She remained calm, observing him. The way he barely made eye contact, the way his posture screamed condescension, it all told her that this was not the first time he had treated someone like this. How many others had he belittled? How many clients had walked away feeling humiliated because of him? She tightened her grip on her phone. "I would like to speak to someone in charge," she said finally, her voice firm but composed. Mr. Calloway smirked. "I am the branch manager. There is no one above me here," he said with unmistakable arrogance. She raised an eyebrow. "No regional supervisor? No corporate representative?" He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, I do not know what kind of game you are playing, but this is a high-level institution. We do not entertain people who do not belong here. So unless you have something substantial to discuss, I suggest you leave before I call security. A flicker of something dark passed through her eyes, but she remained composed. She took a step back, glanced around at the employees nearby, and noticed how they kept their heads down, pretending not to notice what was happening. The customers in the lobby watched in curiosity, their gazes bouncing between her and the manager. She could feel it, tension thick in the air, an unspoken challenge. She took out her phone again, her fingers moving swiftly as she pulled up the direct contact number of the bank's executive division. She pressed call. Mr. Calloway scoffed. "Who are you even calling?" She did not respond, keeping the phone to her ear. Within seconds, a voice on the other end answered. "Ms. Lawson?" The way the voice immediately recognized her sent a visible ripple through the air. The employees at the nearby desks stiffened. The customers who had been quietly observing now leaned in slightly, sensing something unexpected. "Yes," she said, her tone carrying the weight of authority. "I am at the downtown branch. There is an issue that requires immediate attention." The voice on the other end did not hesitate. "I will be there in 5 minutes." She ended the call, slipping the phone back into her bag before looking up at Mr. Calloway, who was still watching her with a bemused expression, as if he had not quite grasped what had just happened. "5 minutes," she said simply. His smirk faltered. "What?" "That is how long you have before this entire situation changes." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Employees started whispering among themselves. Customers exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat, straightening his posture as if trying to regain control. "I do not know what you think is going to happen, but—" Before he could finish, the glass doors of the bank suddenly swung open. A group of sharply dressed individuals walked in, their presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell into silence as they strode toward the center of the lobby. And at that moment, the look on Mr. Calloway's face finally changed. The bank lobby felt frozen in time as the sharply dressed individuals advanced. Their polished shoes echoed against the marble floor, each step a silent announcement of authority. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate. Employees who had been pretending to work now held their breaths, and customers sensed they were about to witness something unforgettable. At the front of the group was a tall man with silver-streaked hair, his expression unreadable, yet his presence alone demanded respect. Every employee recognized him instantly. This was Richard Hayes, the regional director. The mere sight of him sent an electric charge through the staff. He never made surprise visits, unless something was seriously wrong. Mr. Calloway swallowed hard, his arrogance finally showing signs of cracking. He straightened his tie, glancing at the woman before him, still not fully understanding who she was. Richard Hayes did not look at anyone else as he walked directly toward her. He stopped just inches away and extended his hand. "Ms. Lawson," he said with unmistakable respect. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Whispers erupted. Employees exchanged stunned glances. Ms. Lawson shook his hand with an air of quiet authority. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Richard Hayes nodded, his gaze finally shifting toward Mr. Calloway. The silence was suffocating. Calloway's usual smirk was nowhere to be seen. His lips parted slightly as if scrambling for words, but nothing came out. Richard's voice was calm but carried undeniable weight. "Do you know who you have just denied service to?" Mr. Calloway opened his mouth, hesitated, then forced a stiff smile. There must have been some misunderstanding." Richard did not let him finish. "No, the only misunderstanding here is your own incompetence." Calloway's face paled. Richard turned to the nearest employee. "Fetch the branch's financial reports from the last quarter." The employee bolted toward the back, knowing better than to delay. Calloway forced another nervous chuckle. "Sir, I assure you, there was no ill intent." Ms. Lawson finally spoke, her voice even and precise. "I walked into this bank, my own institution, dressed as an ordinary customer, and the first thing your manager did was dismiss me, not because of any valid reason, but because, in his eyes, I did not look important enough." Another stunned silence. The employees were absorbing every word, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Richard exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Calloway, do you realize that Ms. Lawson is not just a client? She is the CEO of this entire bank. She has the power to shut this branch down if she wants. The color drained completely from Calloway's face. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. His body seemed frozen in shock. Ms. Lawson's gaze remained steady. Tell me, Mr. Calloway, how many other customers have you treated this way? How many have walked out feeling humiliated just because they did not fit your personal standards? Calloway's forehead glistened with sweat. Ms. Lawson, I can explain. You do not need to, she cut in. Your actions already did. Just then, the employee returned with a thick folder of reports, handing them to Richard. He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. This branch, he said, has seen a decline in customer satisfaction over the last year. Complaints of poor service, reports of clients leaving to competitors. His eyes lifted, sharp and accusatory. And now I see why, Calloway stammered, his hands twitching. It was just a misunderstanding. Surely we can handle this internally. Ms. Lawson turned to Richard. How do we usually handle cases like this? Richard closed the folder with a finality that sent chills through the air. We terminate them on the spot. Calloway's legs nearly gave out. Mr. Calloway's hands trembled as he grasped the edge of the counter, his mind scrambling for a way out. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray, his once confident smirk completely erased. His entire career, decades of building his reputation, was unraveling before his eyes. Please, he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. There must be some way to fix this. I have dedicated years to this bank. I have managed this branch with efficiency. Ms. Lawson's expression remained unchanged. Efficiency? She repeated, tilting her head slightly. Is that what you call humiliating customers? Dismissing them based on appearances? Denying basic service to someone simply because they did not meet your personal definition of importance? Calloway flinched. It was never personal. It was always personal, Ms. Lawson interrupted, her voice sharp. Because banking is about trust, Mr. Calloway. Every customer who walks through those doors should feel respected, regardless of whether they arrive in a suit or in work boots. But you instead decided that power meant looking down on others. Calloway's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Richard Hayes took a step forward. Your termination is effective immediately, he stated with an air of finality. You will clear out your office today. A wave of hushed gas rippled through the lobby. Employees stood motionless, some casting nervous glances at one another. Calloway's breath came in short, shallow bursts. You cannot do this. I have given my life to this place. You gave this place a reputation it did not deserve, Richard replied coolly. And now, you will leave it. A security officer, who had been standing at the back, now stepped forward. The mere sight of him made Calloway take a shaky step back. This is a mistake, he whispered more to himself than to anyone else. I can fix this. I can prove. You had your chance, Ms. Lawson said. You chose arrogance over service. That choice has consequences. Calloway let out a ragged breath, his gaze darting around, searching for sympathy. But there was none. The employees who once followed his orders now refused to meet his eyes. The customers who had witnessed the scene were whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings, Richard added, his tone unwavering. Calloway let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. He turned toward the employees, eyes pleading. Is this what you all want? To see me thrown out like this? After everything I have done for this branch? No one responded. Silence was his only answer. Finally, Calloway turned back, his shoulders slumping. Defeat hung over him like a heavy shadow. Without another word, he turned and walked toward his office, his footsteps slow and unsteady. The security officer followed closely behind. The room remained eerily silent until the office door clicked shut behind him. Only then did the weight of what had just happened settle into the air. Ms. Lawson exhaled, her gaze sweeping across the room. To the employees here, she began, her voice calm but firm, let this be a lesson. Leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. It is about ensuring that every single person who walks through these doors is treated with the respect they deserve. Several employees nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. Richard Hayes glanced around before turning back to Ms. Lawson. "Shall we?" Ms. Lawson nodded. "Let us ensure this branch becomes what it was always meant to be." Ms. Lawson turned toward the employees, her gaze steady. The weight of everything that had just unfolded was still pressing on the air. The tension had not fully faded, but something else had begun to replace it. Something unspoken but powerful. A shift, a realization. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "And I know many of you may be wondering what happens next." A few employees exchanged glances, their expressions cautious but curious. Some of them had worked under Calloway for years. Others had only recently joined, but had already felt the weight of his authority. Now, for the first time, they were seeing a different kind of leadership. One that did not rely on fear or control, but on accountability. "The foundation of a good business is trust," Ms. Lawson continued. "Trust between the company and its employees. Trust between the employees and their customers. That is something that has been missing here for far too long. But it ends today. This branch will no longer be a place where people feel unwelcome. It will no longer be a place where anyone is judged for how they look or how much they have." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others, still stunned by what had happened, remained silent. But no one disagreed. Richard Hayes stepped forward, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "If anyone feels that they cannot stand behind this vision," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "then now is the time to say so." No one moved, no one spoke. The silence spoke volumes. "Good," Ms. Lawson said, "because change is coming, whether we are ready for it or not. And this change will not be built on rules alone. It will be built on the way we treat people, the way we see them, the way we value them. That is what will define this bank from this day forward." One of the younger tellers, a woman named Natalie, stepped forward hesitantly. "Ms. Lawson," she said, her voice uncertain, "does this mean things are going to be different? I mean, really different?" Ms. Lawson nodded. "Yes, Natalie. It does. It means that from now on, you are not just here to follow orders. You are here to be part of something that matters. You are here to make sure that no one ever walks through these doors and leaves feeling less than they are." Natalie's eyes shone with something close to relief. A few others nodded. The mood in the room was shifting, turning from uncertainty to something stronger. Hope. Richard checked his watch. "We have a lot to do," he said. "But before we move forward, Ms. Lawson, I believe there is something else we need to take care of." Ms. Lawson followed his gaze and turned back toward the teller window where it had all begun. The same teller who had refused to help her earlier was still standing there, his face pale. He had remained frozen in place since Calloway's dismissal, clearly hoping that attention would pass over him. "Eric," Ms. Lawson said, addressing him directly for the first time. He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Ms. Lawson, I did not mean—" "Tell me something," she interrupted, her tone still calm but leaving no room for excuses. "Would you have treated me any differently if you had known who I was?" Eric hesitated, but he did not answer. Ms. Lawson nodded as if she had expected that. "That is the problem," she said simply. "And that is what needs to change." Eric looked down, shame washing over his face. Ms. Lawson exhaled. "The question now is whether you are willing to change with it." Eric stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. The weight of Ms. Lawson's words pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He had spent years following Calloway's lead, believing that appearances determined worth, that certain customers deserved more attention than others. But now, standing in the aftermath of everything that had just happened, he saw the truth, and it made him sick. He started, but the words caught in his throat. Ms. Lawson watched him, waiting. There was no anger in her expression, no gloating, only expectation, a silent demand for him to face what he had done and decide who he wanted to be. Eric swallowed hard and looked around. The other employees were watching him, some with cautious curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment. He could feel the weight of their stares, the way they were measuring him now, the same way he had measured customers for years. But the difference was glaring. This time, he was the one being sized up. And it was not about his clothes or his bank balance. It was about his character. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice quieter than he had intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. I was wrong, he repeated louder this time. I treated people unfairly. I looked down on customers who did not look the way I thought they should. And I ignored the fact that this job is supposed to be about service, not status. A murmur rippled through the employees. Some looked surprised, others skeptical. But Ms. Lawson's expression did not change. Eric turned to the elderly man he had refused to help earlier, the very same man Ms. Lawson had stepped in for. Shame burned in his chest as he met the man's eyes. I am sorry, he said, his voice thick with regret. I should have helped you the moment you walked up to my counter. I should have treated you with respect. The old man studied him for a long moment. Then, to Eric's surprise, he nodded. It takes a good man to admit when he has done wrong, he said simply, but it takes an even better one to change. Eric's throat tightened. He turned back to Miss Lawson. I do not want to be the kind of employee that Mr. Calloway trained me to be, he said, determination settling into his voice. I want to do better. I want to be part of this change. Ms. Lawson considered him for a moment, then she nodded. Then prove it, she said. From this moment on, every single customer who walks through these doors will be treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. No exceptions. No excuses. Eric nodded, a strange sense of relief washing over him. Ms. Lawson turned back to the rest of the employees. That goes for all of you, she said. This is not just about Eric. This is about the culture of this bank. We will be better. We will do better. A quiet moment passed, then, one by one, the employees started to nod. Some more hesitant than others, but all of them recognizing that something important had just shifted. Richard Hayes, who had been watching everything unfold, stepped forward. I believe that covers everything, he said. Ms. Lawson, I trust you to lead this branch into a future it can be proud of? Ms. Lawson nodded. I will. With that, Richard turned to leave. But before he walked out, he paused and glanced at the elderly man. Sir, he said, if you still wish to open that account, I would be honored to assist you personally. The old man chuckled. I appreciate that, son, but I think I will stay right here and let this young man prove he is serious about changing. All eyes turned back to Eric, who swallowed hard and gave a small nod. He stepped forward and gestured toward his counter. I would love to help you, he said, his voice steady. The elderly man smiled and moved toward the counter, and as he did, something shifted in the air, a sense of renewal, of possibility. Ms. Lawson watched as the employees straightened, as the tension that had once filled the room began to fade, replaced by something else, hope. For the first time in a long time, this place finally felt like a bank where everyone belonged.